everyone, and welcome to Tech Horizons 2025 with Tech Achieve Media webinar focused on one critical question, which is how do organizations turn emerging technologies into scalable real world implementations, right? And this is a very important question because a recent McKinsey study has found that while 70% of organizations are experimented with AI, fewer than 20% are seeing measurable business impact. Similar execution gaps also exist across cybersecurity, AI governance, and even quantum readiness. So, this is why we are hosting this webinar today, as it is end of the year, and a lot of exciting events have transformed the world of technology this year. We feel the timing is now perfect to take stock of all the major transformative trends that are impacting the industry to be better prepared for the upcoming year. So, today's discussion brings leaders who are working at the intersection of strategy, implementation, and risk, helping organizations move beyond pilots to proof of concepts, right? So, let me now introduce our speakers without any further ado. So, we are joined by Mr. Varun Saxena, who's the Director of AI and Analytics at Anurop. Varun is an expert across functions such as sales, marketing, product management, analytics, AI, research, and Varun is also leading AI and analytic functions at Anurop currently. It's also interesting to know that Varun has spent close to 15 years of his career in the banking and financial services industry and has recently co-authored his first book on revolutionizing banking and financial services with generative AI. Varun, thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks for having me, Supreet.
Thank you so much. So we are also joined by Mr. Abhishek Tripathi, who is the head of cybersecurity and IT operations at high level. With deep experience in enterprise security operations, Abhishek is a seasoned cybersecurity and IT leader who believes in enabling the innovation and growth in businesses by delivering resilient, secure, and scalable technology ecosystem. Thank you so much for joining us, Abhishek.
Thank you for having me, Supriya.
Thank you so much. We are also joined by Professor Ajay Singh, who is a member of the National Mission Task Force and a leading expert in quantum technologies. He plays a key role in shaping India's quantum roadmap with a focus on quantum computing, cryptography, and future ready infrastructure. He is also a former CEO with over 35 years of experience and is an award winning author of 5 books. Am I right, Professor Ajay Singh? It's 5 books, isn't it?
It's seven.
Okay, that's great to know. So we'll also be joined by Mr. David Aramban. He's the Vice President of Sales at Pelorus Technologies, where he works very closely with enterprises to secure AI-driven systems. His expertise lies in transforming a low-performing territory into the profitable one by enhancing the business from scratch and building it upward. All right. Thank you so much for joining, David. And thank you everyone for joining us here today. So without any further ado, let's get into our discussion for today. But before we begin, I'd like to tell our audience that in case you have any questions for our experts during the course of the webinar, please feel free to drop it in the comment section and we'll come back to you towards the end, right? All right. So, for this topic, let's start by beginning with AI, right? Because that is the talk of town and it's the most actively adopted, yes, most challenging technology to scale. So, Varun, let me first come to you, right? Gartner predicts that by 2026, over 80% of enterprises will have used Gen AI models. Yet, nearly half of these initiatives may be paused or abandoned due to poor integration and unclear ROI, right? So, Bharat, and Gen AI moves from POCs to enterprise rollout. Execution has become a real challenge, and it is something we hear very often in our conversations with technology leaders. So, what are the three biggest implementation bottlenecks you're seeing today, and how should organizations redesign their workflows to unlock measurable ROI from Gen AI investments?
Great question. So it's a real life problem we face, and uh, I would start with the biggest bottleneck being the data available or the way data is fragmented. It's not in the proper form, which tends to lead to the largest challenge because many a times you work on models, you build models, there is a output, and then someone has to rework it manually. So, which is essentially the purpose not being solved. Uh, Second, I would say the a big bottleneck is I would say share of mind or whatever. Possibly the point being that because of the FOMO, there are too many projects being worked upon. So, which ensures there is uh, the quantity is there, the quality gets missed out. So that's a big reason. Typically, what I see. Rather than being focused on a few high impact, business friendly or business impact use cases, many a times, see practically what happens. A lot of these are tech driven. Okay, not always is it in line with the business impact, if I may use the word. Right. It may sound very exciting. It may be out of the world, but it may end up not really impacting the business as such, which beyond a point then doesn't lead to the organization itself adopting it or seeing value in it. The last bottleneck which I would see is more change management slash organizational setup slash whatever you may want to call it, but essentially uh, Gen AI is driven by the innovation teams, yeah, tech teams broadly, right? Uh, People consider it. The end users typically tend to consider it more as a support bolo, those kind of things, rather than relying completely on it, trusting it, and using it to their benefit. That again, that will take time. It happens with all technology. It's not just AI. It's happened when computers came in and whatever, or for that matter, banking evolved into UPI and things like that. It will take time, but currently, I would rank these three as the biggest real bottlenecks on the ground.
That was a very, very pertinent point. Varun, thank you for sharing that. And usually, when we talk to industry leaders, right, uh, everybody wants to adopt Gen AI in some form or the other. But it also comes with associated AI security and governance risks. Because usually organizations are not able to keep a tab on how employees are using Gen AI in their organization. And on this point, I'd like to come to David. So, David, as AI scales, so do the risks. Right? And, a report shows that organizations lacking AI governance is each cost nearly 30% higher, driven by data leakage and mobile misuse, right? And many enterprises also underestimate the AI specific risk during rapid adoption, right? So, as organizations deploy Gen AI at scale, what could you say are the underestimated risks in today's AI models, and how can enterprises mitigate these risks without slowing down innovation?
So this is a good afternoon, everybody. This is a very broad, you know, topic to address because you see, AI, blockchain, uh, started with even a simple Google Maps to Siri and others, all came up with something to assist in our day-to-day, operations or life, or as you may put it. However, these are, highly scaled machines put in the background. But when we talk about AI, the biggest issue is there is no regulation to monitor its deployment, its scales, and what happens in terms of the outcomes. From my industry point of view, I can give you a very valid example towards this. Today we work on a lot of government projects, especially in law enforcement and other agencies. Now, each and every one of us know that government projects or government procurement is based on tenders, and tenders are based on a BOQ, and BOQ are based on certain specifications. Today, I'm seeing, the industry moving towards specifications being made using AI, and you are ending up getting, query based specifications being published in tenders, which is causing confusion. In one particular state where we were deploying, to our pleasant surprise, we wanted, a particular set of tools, and we were sticking to the top one or two tools available in the market, and we had an entire gambit of tools, right from tools that are 1 lakh in value to 1 crore in value. So So while AI is AI in the way we want it, if it is not going to be regulated, if there's no regulation put in place, you are going to have things that are going to be so objective coming up from based on your query. So there is no human interface or human link to the output that is coming out of the AI, and that's where we find things that can get off, out of hand when you're talking about deploying it in an enterprise. Okay, for personal use, just to pass a query like what we used to do by typing a query in Google and so on. Now with voice enablement, you'll still get, because there are so many queries being passed world over. So machine is going to learn. But if we are going to use AI for work, we better have another layer, in our old IT parlance, a middleware or whatever you may want to call it, to really look at the output of what this AI or what this engine is giving us, so that there is no chaos being created at the deployment layer level.
Absolutely pertinent point there, David. And since we are talking about cybersecurity in the AI era, I'd now like to come to Abhishek, right? Because AI has its benefits and it has its negatives as well. It is a double-edged sword, because it's being used in, advanced phishing and social engineering attacks that are now up to 3 times more effective than traditional techniques, right? Abhishek, this shifts a new demand on security leaders, right? As AI accelerates both cyber attacks and defenses, where should CISO prioritize their investments to deliver the biggest real world security impact?
Thanks for that. And trust me, Jivat, I mean, this is a good question. And coming from what just David said, right, there is a lot that is happening there in this elite. Now, my question is focused towards the investment, so I'll try to in that area. But one of the funny things that has happened lately is, and you rightly mentioned phishing and everything. Earlier, we used to tell you that if you find a phishing attack, you need to look into the email for the grammatical mistakes and for all sort of mistakes that you gotta make, because these are from application people who are just trying to push you into something. But now we tell people that if it is too perfect, expect that to be a phishing attack as well, right? So these are changed, of course, and that's where when we look at the AI based attacks, they have become much more faster, right? And to to tackle those, there so basically there are two things too. One would be speed, and another one will be the persistence. My bad. To talk about the speed, we cannot find the speed of AI with manual defenses. So I would say that your investment should be routed towards something which is giving you ARE based defenses. To fight the attack vector is those in a kind of orange to orange comparison, right? Uh, your source systems, the security orchestration and automation and response systems, need to evolve, cater to set attacks. As the playbooks haven't remained the same hard coded. Earlier, we used to say that if this is the kind of attack, do this. It's not same. It has to become very, very dynamic. The EDR and XDR that we continue to use, and they are one of the very perfect in the use, which actually enforces your security. The alerts coming from this could not be managed by humans, because this can be really fast. This can be of very level, very so that magnitude can only be contained by, and we may not want to leave it for the AI to decide, but at least the quarantining is something that would not like a human behavior. You can use the KI decision making to quarantine those nodes which are actually alerting you. So, uh, and again, the last part, I won't say last part exactly, but yeah, supply chain is something that is not only about third party risk management. Now it has moved on towards a net party as well, because your supply chain, the third party has its own third parties. So tools you are using to evaluate or rate your third parties, that needs to evolve too. That needs to look into your vendors as well, so that your whole supply chain is secure. And for that, you need an AI based system which is looking into this. uh, application security, posture management is another context. I mean, because we are moving from, I started from right, I'm moving towards left. And shifting left, you will find application security posture management is one of the very important things to look at. And what ESPN needs to be further fortified with AI. So there are AI tools, there would be lesser false positives. We will be able to minus these things better. Second aspect that I talked about, other than speed, is persistence. And very formulas work over my where they have said, and whether it will come up or not. But now it is all UIP. They can just leave it till the time it gives up the blip, and it can just stick ID for longer, and it doesn't need any direction. The day it gets the right purpose, we go and pick the person that okay, I'm up now, and we can start our thing. So the current age ADR and XDR, to look at behavioral aspects, maybe they need to evolve to or something which is just sitting for no reason and just being out there. They might have to look at those two, and that is not possible to look at without AI into picture, because this is so much of information and so much of data sitting for all the services and tasks those are happening over there. It needs to look into anything that is just sitting suspiciously and just waiting for its time to come to light. So yeah, that's how I see how we can just further fortify this.
Absolutely, Abhishek. I mean, fight AI with AI should be the mantra going forward. And you're absolutely, it's spot on with that. So, since you're talking about security, right, we'd like to bring in a new dimension, which is quantum readiness. And I'd like to come to Professor Ajay Singh for that. When we talked to the industry, we were under the impression that quantum encryption is something that is, way ahead in future. We don't need to worry about it now. But we saw a number of occurrences happening, which makes it very important for us to discuss quantum today, right? We saw companies of QU Labs signing up with BSNL and HCL, and saw quantum research. But also, if I had to talk about the World Economic Forum, it had stated that harvest now, decrypt later is an actual threat. And it makes quantum readiness a present day concern and not a future one, right? So, how should enterprises begin their quantum safe transition today? And what steps should they prioritize to mitigate emerging quantum risks?
Good afternoon. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
Am I audible?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes,
okay.
absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
I just like to rewind to your theme of this meeting, turning emerging trends into scalable implementations. That's what everyone is concerned about all over the world. Billions of dollars are invested today, unlike millions earlier. And there's a lot at stake for companies who are building technologies. There's a lot at stake for users. And what happens is uh, sometimes disruptive technologies happen. They don't happen every day. You have random collection of technologies that actually happen every now and then. There's a lot of hype around them, and then they either grow or they die their own death. But there are technologies like quantum, there are technologies like AI, as we have just seen, which have taken the world by storm. But unlike AI, quantum remains shrouded in mystery. People do not know, people are not aware. AI has gone to the end users today. Whereas quantum is not even reaching corporate heads and CISOs, not in terms of making it an immediate priority anyway. And the reason is that technology in quantum is evolving. It's evolving at a super fast rate, I must say. There's great momentum because you must know that the world has invested over $55 billion in quantum technologies. And this year, UN has declared it as the year of quantum science and technology, marking 100 years of quantum science development. So you can imagine 100 years of research has gone into this technology. $55 billion of investment has gone into this technology. Now the question is, what can it do for us? How can it? How can this kind of technology scale? Is it set to scale? Is it set to? You've talked about the cryptographic challenge, but there are other challenges that quantum faces even today.
Because the question people are asking is, how great is this technology? And ironically, the word quantum is derived from the Latin word quantus, which means how great. So the question is, how great is this technology? What is it going to do for us? Is it going to change our lives? Is it going to change corporates, both from a risk point of view and an opportunity point of view? So these are questions that are floating around, and they will get answered in due course. But as in AI, questions are being raised today. Similarly, it will be raised in quantum. It all depends on what kind of business models come into play, what kind of technologies on offer, how it integrates with existing systems. So there are many, many challenges and many hurdles to cross, including some technology challenges that quantum technology is yet to cross. That said, the world is worried about something called Q-Day. Earlier, you heard about Y2K when all computers were expected to fail. Today, people are talking about Q-Day. Q-Day means the day a quantum computer is available to a hacker and he can break your present encryption, which brings me to your question. So if a hacker can break encryption with a sufficiently powered quantum computer, the whole world is at risk. Everybody across the world, data is protected through encryption, which is now going obsolete. The key sizes that we use, the algorithms that we use will be broken in seconds. A classical computer won't be able to do it in years. So there is a great risk that the world is facing, and nations all over the world are cognizant. That's why you have national missions in many countries which are trying to address this problem, some through mandates, some through advisories, some through regulatory mechanisms. But the whole world is concerned of a threat that we don't know which is the date. In Y2K, you had a definite date. In Q-Day, you don't have a date, because when probably Q-Day arrives, let's say a country like China gets there first, they're not going to announce that they have a sufficiently powered computer. Today, they announce all the milestones that they achieve, but they can quietly just break the encryption without anybody knowing. So we are in trouble. Then you talked about HNDL attacks, and the Harvest Now defibrillator is a cybersecurity problem, which my friend Abhishek will be in a better position to talk about, because it talks about overall resilience and overall cybersecurity. You need to tighten up your systems because the hackers are trying to gather as much data as possible, and when when they have an access to a quantum computer, they will try and break the encryption and create whatever mischief or havoc they want to. So these are the challenges that are on the table. But you must know that there are on the one side nations, there are on the one side big tech players. All the big tech players have stakes. IBM, Amazon, Google, Microsoft, everybody is there in the game, and they've heavily invested in the game. So there's a lot of hype, but there's this fear coming to the enterprise risks. Now, these enterprise risks, how real are they? I talked about Q-Day. So people are saying, when Q-Day comes, we'll get ready. So these dates have been set anywhere from 2028 to 2030 to 2033 by various countries, which they believe will be the time when this computer will be available. But every day there is news. Every day things are happening, which is saying that it will happen faster than what has been projected. Now, there is a timeline. Organizations have to follow many things to move to what is called post-quantum cryptography. What is at risk? It's our cryptographic assets. So to move to quantum cryptographic assets, first of all, you need to know what cryptographic assets you have in your organization. Second, you need to know which are the high-risk items, which are the moderate risk items, and which are the low-risk items. So you've got to address the high-risk items first in order to, so you should know first of all, so it's called, you do a C bomb and you go ahead and do a Q bomb, which also shows whether which of your cryptographic assets will be vulnerable to quantum. So now you have these bombs ready, you know where to go. But then how do you do it? That is called PQC migration. And PQC migration is not a day's job. It's not an upgrade. It's not a technology that you plug and play. It's a process that may take anywhere between 1.5 years to 3 years. What is at stake? All the critical infrastructure in the country, not only our country, every country is at stake, and data protection as it exists today will not exist. So therefore, quantum is a highly disruptive technology. There are opportunities. We'll talk about the opportunities later, but right now, the risks outweigh the opportunity simply because of this cryptographic element. The other thing is that organizations have are yet to take cognizance of what is happening. They're yet to train their people. And I would suggest that they collaborate with quantum vendors, both national, international vendors, to actually set up a roadmap. Because unless they set up a roadmap and action these things, you can't do it in a day when they happen.
True, true. Absolutely. That was a great overview, Professor Ajay Singh. Thank you so much for that. And, there might be some time left for enterprises for Q Day 2028, like Professor Ajay Singh, but, like Professor Ajay Singh said, but what they do not have time for is AI agents are becoming increasingly autonomous and multimodal, right? And with that, Varun, I'd like to come to you because IDC estimates that, by 2027, over 40% of enterprise AI solutions will be multimodal and agentic, and they will be capable of autonomous decision making across systems, right? And this presents a problem because there needs to be foundational data, orchestration, and governance capabilities in place that enterprises need to build today. So, what would you say they are? Varun, if I had to ask you, what would you say they are? How can enterprises be prepared for this?
So Supriya, I think it starts with having a unified data across multi-modes, right? Whether it's text, whether it's documents, whether it's audio, video, images, it has to be heat sync, as I would call it, so that there is one unified place where uh, whenever there is agents getting trained, it is on the entire set rather than a separate agent for voice, separate agent for images and things like that. I'm not able to hear you in case you're saying something.
No, no, perfect, perfect. I'm just, agreeing with
Okay.
what you're
Oh, okay. Thanks. Thanks. So that is the starting point for me, because you have a unified data foundation. On that, you start building your various use cases. Of course, in the foundation, you also need to ensure the data is clean. It is There's a slight change from earlier, where earlier data was more kept for analytics. The way forward would be, it would tend to be data ready for decision making. Okay. And gradually it will move to where you're saying that autonomous agents kind of finally take decisions too and move ahead. Okay. So that shift is going to happen, or is happening to a large extent, where the data is ready to take decisions. Whether currently it is happening with humans in the loop, or humans getting the data and taking the decision, tomorrow it may tend to move the next level as such. Uh, so also you will always see, and we've started seeing it in the last 1 year, we use it ourselves, that across multi modes there is the data which gets used or gets inputted to each other. We are already seeing that, even where I'm in our organization, giving us huge benefits, and that will reach the next level. I can give you simple examples. We are in the real estate space. There is a lead coming at night, at 11 in the night, right? You can call the customer, and by next day, the customer will possibly forget he had given a lead. So the journey starts at 11 with the GenAI chatbot, who's interacting with the client in and out, giving him details about the property, answering questions, giving brochures, XYZ. Then there is a question: do you want to speak to a advisor? Or if the customer is okay, there's a voice AI bot calling and explaining and fixing a site visit. Okay. So it's two kind of tools getting used, right? During the day, it's even further. The AI agent directly in the CRM fixes the site visit, hands it over to a human sales agent, as an example, right? If the customer is not responding on call, you have that history. Next time there'll be a WhatsApp message which goes to the customer, and vice versa. So so many use cases where you tend to benefit from each other. One is in interaction with the customers. Second is another example, the predictive AI models which are run now actually as an input parameter have the Gen AI interactions or chatbot interactions or voice AI calling interactions of the customers to understand their behavior better. So, finally, in today's day, it's the human which is finally executing once the model gives an output. But going forward, then it will be a common norm where it's the agents who decide the next course of action. So like we internally speak, tomorrow, a couple of years down the line, you will have 5 team members, 3 human and 2 agents. And gradually, the agents would tend to be possibly a larger proportion. That's how we tend to look at it.
Absolutely, Varun. And it will be a mix of human and agents, and the agents will increase, is what you say. So that's a very interesting observation. Thank you for sharing that. So with that, David, I'd like to come to you. Like Varun said, Gartner has also taken out a study that wants that over 60% of Gen AI deployment, will trace security or compliance issues post production if guardrails are not embedded early, right? And like Varun said, there are going to be an increase in agents going forward. So as AI moves from pilots to production, what would you say are the governance, security, and architectural guardrails that would be essential to ensure Gen AI models remain trustworthy, compliant, and aligned with the business objective?
So, sorry to say, we are far, far behind on deploying any legal framework around AI as of now, as we speak. In fact, even Professor Ajay made a very valid point in terms of quantum. I mean, quantum coming in will change the game completely. Today, we do not have, stringent laws even on crypto. Or for that matter, let us look at a basic financial fraud that is happening across mule accounts. So, because I'm in the industry of law enforcement in terms of this, we deploy tools that are Gen AI enabled, which assist investigations and so on and so forth. But we don't have stringent laws to enforce them beyond a point. So we can use AI to enhance a video or to enhance a particular license plate that comes in an investigation, or use AI to uh, uh, to deploy multi-layer technology in terms of getting to the mule account layers and getting into various portals. But how do you enforce that? We don't have governance around that as yet. uh, that's at the law enforcement areas. If there's a data breach, today we talk about when, not if it is going to happen. When it happens, we do not know whether we can have incidents response in such a fast manner to curtail that kind of a breach. Those cybersecurity tools are enhancing and going, in a manner that we hope that it is, but we are slow. There is no framework that is happening. There are policies being made around AI, but I think if we have to enforce it, we need to move much faster than we are right now, because things are changing at a much faster level. At a local, say for example, at a local police station, right? If somebody comes and have had using AI, have had their voice mocked in a digital arrest scam, how do we enforce that digital arrest scam once the money is taken off the account? We don't have that governance in place. So, so while tools are, very freely available to change voice, to change videos, use deep fake AI, and so on and so forth, we really do not have the laws right now in place to speedily, change that into actionable intelligence and then take it to the deployment. Because we are, today we are talking about minimum 100 GB of data on a phone. So how are we going to investigate uh, any digital artifact that comes in? We have to use AI, but using AI with predictive analysis, with the pattern analysis, link analysis. So I think there are multiple agencies that we'll have to deploy to come up with a framework and policy as to how this is going to be taken to one into the corporate and business world where a lot of frauds are happening, and two is to the last mile, which is the citizen like you and I dialing the 1913 number and coming up with an AI fraud. I mean, how do we go about that? While 0 day Q days are all in the pipeline, I think we definitely need to speed up governance around this, because we really do not have frameworks in place over there. Lastly, I think today, if I have to hire you, you spoke about humans in the loop, or agent bots or chat bots or whatever you want to deploy. How do I how do I say that, look, David is an AI expert? Who's going to certify me as an expert? Or anybody in that manner, because it's so dynamic today that there is nobody you can claim that I am an AI expert, because AI itself is dynamic and it is fluid. So I think we are entering an era where coming up with some kind of a policy around this will also be a framework, and it will not be a policy. It will have to be frameworks and multiple frameworks deployed. I don't even think we are ready. Organizations are ready to look at blockchain. Forget about AI. If I My experience has been, when I go to organizations and say, transfer all your data on a blockchain, they will not do it, because it's still a security issue. It's still a policy issue. There is no framework over there. Lastly, while we are using AI and machine learning, these words AI, ML, and whatever we may want to call it, very quick. Uh, we talk about data remaining in the country by various laws. We still don't know in what form, in what implication are those data moving across borders into other countries, into other servers. We really don't know. Like Professor Ajay says, no country is going to say that I am, already ready with my quantum policy or my quantum network or whatever. They are going to look at it in a very, very subtle manner. We really don't know, but a simple thing. I, a citizen to today does not know. Normal citizens do not know how to switch off ads and ad intel that is going from their phone to Google servers or Apple servers. So we don't even have that framework in place. So, how I think governance is going to be a very, very big issue in the months and years to come.
Absolutely, David. And that was a very pertinent point you mentioned, where we discuss all these technologies and we discuss all these laws, but implementation remains a challenge when you actually speak about them. And on this note, I'd like to come to Abhishek, because we've been talking about zero trust architectures for years now. But if you actually look at surveys, 25% of enterprises have actually operationalized zero trust beyond identity management. And that's a pretty low number. So, what practical milestones and maturity markers would you say should organizations aim for to ensure zero trust becomes an operational reality rather than just a conceptual framework? Abhishek?
Thanks for that. Okay, coming back to the questions, a lot is being discussed out here, and there are two every time I would say two aspects, but here, for anything to be enforced, one thing is policy and another thing is execution, right? And as David was just saying that there are a lot of policies need to be evolved from regulation perspective, but there has to be policies that has to evolve within within your systems, whether it is a private organization or a government organization, to able to tackle any such challenge, right? And I have been in touch with a lot of government agencies lately, and what I have seen out there is excuse me, that the people who have been put to secure the perimeter, to secure the infrastructure, they themselves may not be equipped enough, right from the policy, which gives them the authority to get the things done, to the knowledge as well. You just cannot pull someone and make them a CISO and get the things done. So this policy and enforcement needs to be really, really strong. Now, I was about to give certain basic formulations around maturing your overall identity to achieve zero trust, and uh, Dr. Ajay actually rightly mentioned something which actually makes few of my arguments a bit lighter, because once quantum computing comes into picture, because we are sitting at a cusp of a lot that is happening. And if you just look at AI plus quantum computing, I mean, whatever zero trust we are talking about, everything will come down. The whole fort will come down, right? But the core argument actually revolves around how to achieve that zero trust. And zero trust is nothing but identity plus endpoint. Securing the two together, just tying the two together, may just help us achieve something which will give us, I would say, kind of assurance that, yeah, we are secure. Because in the last question, when I was answering, it was more about the endpoint, securing the endpoint. If you're able to, because there are only two ways that these malicious actors can get in. Either they will get someone's identity to get it, or they will come through your endpoints, right? They will break into your endpoint and then they will move it. So if you're tying the two together, you have much better chances of achieving that zero trust. Now, moot point here is about the maturity markers that we were talking about. And uh, if I have to look at it, and what I have seen, which has been evolving over the time, the first phase and the easiest way would be to bring in an enterprise, to bring all your applications to single sign-on. So if you're bringing everything to single sign-on, one aspect of something just sitting out there that is not controlled, some employee left or some identity just left out without knowing, that will go up. If we are putting single sign-on, if the person is active, fine. The day the person leaves, the account gets disabled, and you are there. And I think there was a question around this as well in the chat. So yeah, that is the first step towards achieving zero trust, where you can bring in single sign-on. And I'm still talking about the user perspective of it. I'm not talking about the non-human identities, the NHIs, right? The second point is, I would say, unified endpoint management. If you bring in an MDM or any other tool, now this unified endpoint management tool with identity, it makes it much more robust. It becomes more deadly in terms of, I wouldn't say deadly. It is not the right word. It becomes much better, but becomes more pertinent to be able to secure your perimeter. So what it will do is, it will look at the identity, and if the identity belongs to your organization, then only it will move forward. Otherwise, it will just say, no, you're not allowed to get it. Right? So you are tying your devices with your identity, and you are achieving the security that you need. And as this AI thing is going on, increasing, no, and a lot of times what happens is people take over an existing session, create their own session, and they try to hit the malicious actors. That's what they do. So this whole session management needs to become much more dynamic. So if during the session, if the IP address changes, or the device that was authorized that changes, the session moves from the authorized device to some other device, this needs to reset. So unless that is happening, the sessions will be hijacked and people will be able to get it. Now, that is from user endpoint perspective. When you come to application, this whole thing changes, because non-human identities are almost 45 times the user identities. I was reading somewhere. So in any of the systems, your non-human identities are almost 45 times of user identity, because these service accounts, these share accounts, a lot of tokens, EDI tokens, and all these things are there across your systems. They are sitting out there for you to verify at various places to authenticate. So these IP allowless kind of thing has gone. Now it has to be replaced with cryptographic identities. Now, cryptography is, again, as I said, Dr. Ajay said that it may get compromised over time, and we may have better cryptography as quantum computing evolves further. But yeah, currently that's how we go forward. We have to have cryptographic identities to access the service. Now, second point is, and it has seen a lot in various organizations, is hard-coded secrets. What it will do is they will just put the key out in there in the code itself. It will keep on authenticating and the work will keep on going. But someday someone will get hands to it and it will just break your system. So hard-coded identities need to go without doubts. They cannot stay. They don't remain pertinent now. Network microsegmentation, a lot of VLAN and all those things have been in picture since long. But when it comes to your application tiered architecture, you need to have network microsegmentation now, where you are just containing certain part of your applications and services at a certain place so that it is not exposed a lot to the world to be able to laterally move, because lateral movement is the huge and largest problem that we are actually coping with. And last point that I can think of would be like service to service authentication and just in time kind of the concepts to be implemented, which secures the applications better. So yeah, I think my thoughts will revolve around this only at this point. Thank you.
That was a great technical overview that we shared, Abhishek, and it was wonderful. Thank you so much, and I'm sure our viewers will also appreciate it. And I can see some questions have also come for all the experts, but I'll just wait for the final question, to to Professor Ajay Singh to finish, and then we can go over to the questions. So, Professor Ajay Singh, everything that we have discussed so far, right? They have all moved from POCs to actually deployment. They've all moved from POCs to deployment stage. However, quantum technologies are still moving towards early real world, use cases. But BCG estimates that this could unlock a 450 to 850 billion in global economic value by 2040, particularly in optimization and simulation, right? So, where do you see the earliest practical implementation of quantum technologies, and what infrastructure and ecosystem readiness is required to support these use cases?
And let me place it in the form of two perspectives that are to be understood for these technologies to get adopted widely and then used widely and then give return on investment, give revenue, profitability to the people who have invested in them. The first one, let me turn a negative into a positive, that the cryptography that we are using now has lasted 30 odd years. So therefore, if we make the step to post-quantum migration, your cryptographic assets will be protected for hopefully another 20, 30 years before some other technology breakthrough happens. That's number one. Number two is, if these applications are to succeed, there are lots of pilots, as you rightly said, which are going on, because right now there must be about maybe 15, 20 quantum computers all over the world, and it's expected to reach only 5,000 by 2030. So it's a slow progress, but there I can say from an insider's view that it's a steady progress. Now, what is happening because of these big bets? For example, Google is invested in quantum chemistry, and IBM is invested in molecular simulation. Now, these are things that quantum computers can do extremely well. We have one more myth that quantum computers are going to replace classical computers. That's not going to happen. Quantum computers will integrate and they will do a job which classical computers cannot do today. They have compute power way beyond the classical computers, which have actually, if you see the processors, we've reached billions of transistors on a chip, which is now reached almost end of life. So some new breakthrough has to happen. So quantum computers is not the answer for replacing classical. They have to coexist with classical computers, but do applications which the world is not able to handle today, which we think are practically impossible. So I talked about drug discovery, which Google and IBM are working on, and that's something which probably, if it had happened during COVID and we had a ready quantum computer, our vaccines would have been ready much faster. So that is one area. The other big area that's bothering the world is climate change, and you guys are going through the deeper effects of climate change, I guess, in Delhi, but it's affecting everybody. And we have no computers that can handle very complex models today. Again, a quantum computer is able to do that. Microsoft is working heavily on that. They're working on energy grids because energy is a concern all over the world. Airbus is working on fusion, where they believe how they can save fuel and how they can move towards sustainability. There are SDG goals also to be met, and those SDG goals can be met if we have the power of quantum computing. Then there is transportation optimization of routes and so on, and then there is GPS navigation. Just yesterday, China has announced a GPS navigation breakthrough in using quantum computers without any other technology in place. So we are going through to see some changes which we have never seen. And I think David talked about financial applications and fraud management and the challenges for mule accounts and so on. Now, here is where you need the power of quantum computing, because you need to do all this in real time. You don't have time to find out mule accounts and then disable them. Cyber frauds are happening 24/7 every second. So, therefore, these are some of the areas where quantum computing is going to make a huge difference. Finally, a success of any technology will depend on how many use cases you get, how powerful those use cases are, what will be the return on investment, and what will be the commercial models on offer. So the thing is that quantum is going to go the cloud way. You're going to have quantum computers available, like you can access a cloud, you can access a quantum computer. Having said that, China has again announced that they have desktop quantum computers. Of course, they're not so powerful, they're weaker versions. But the point is that we are seeing technology revolution happening as we speak. And well, all this will happen. Very difficult to say, but it is going to happen. So we got to brace ourselves for it.
Absolutely, sir. And technological revolution is happening, and it seems to be happening in China. So, with that, let me go over to the questions that our audience is asking you. Varun, there is a question for you. What signals tell you that an AI initiative is truly ready to scale enterprise wide, and when is it better to pause or redesign?
Uh, okay, great. Great question. So whenever we start building or working on a project, it's essential that we have a ROI kept in mind. And by ROI, I mean it could be anything. It could be whether it's on one side revenue going up, conversion rates. It could be cost reduction. It could be engagement. Whatever is the final objective, which has to be in sync with the business objectives. So many a times the gap is that the person making the model or running the show may have different thought processes on what is successful. On the ground for the business, the success parameters may be different. So to start with, the success parameters have to be decided, which is for everybody, so that there's a common goal. Beyond that, then you kind of track specific to that goal, because every use case will have a different objective to a large extent. In some cases, it might be reducing fraud, it might be, in some cases, cost, it might be increasing book revenues, and so on and so forth. So, uh, so whenever we start, typically there's a POC pilot for a particular thing. If the objectives are clearly seen, met, then you kind of look at scaling up. Of course, you need to look at things like governance ho raha hai, risk kya hai, is it hallucinating, not hallucinating, because somewhere you may, obviously you'll never have 100% ready, but what amount of hallucination you are okay with, because anything wrong also has a reputational impact many a times, right? I would tend to pause it in between in either case. अगर governance या वहाँ पे challenge है, या फिर the objective is not being met. Okay. So the question also had, how do you possibly look at or when do you redesign? How do you look at redesigning? My take is, if there's some drastic technology, or I wouldn't say drastically, a new technology which is drastically different or much more efficient, then you possibly look at redesigning. It need not mean, at no stage does it mean that if I have built my use case with a technology which was 3-year old, it will not run today. you may upgrade it, but of course, if there's a complete different way which is coming in quantum AI aa gaya, suppose, I'm just saying kal ko aa gaya, you may need to upgrade, right? But in the current scenario, it's not that because every day there are new products coming, higher, better products coming, faster products coming, but it does not mean you really need to change what you're doing. So redesign, if you have a problem, you may need to redesign if the business process changes. That's more area where you may need to redesign your existing projects. अगर आपका बिजनेस प्रोसेस ही यूज केस पे द प्रोसेस इटसेल्फ इज चेंजिंग and the business model is changing, there you'll tend to need to redesign. That's how I would look at it. I hope I've answered the question.
Absolutely, Varun. Thank you so much for that. And Abhishek, somebody wants to learn from you about zero trust journey. For organizations early in their zero trust journey, what is the one control or capability that delivers the fastest security improvement?
So I answered that question when I was answering. Achieve zero trust, it's a long journey, but where you can start is single sign on. That gives you enough confidence because everything is being managed from the single identity provider. That gives you kind of and this is from endpoint perspective. Rest is you start removing hard coded. If you want to go into your application servers and all those things, you would like to start removing hard coded secrets first. And there are multiple tools in the market that you can find. And first remove those. And once you are removing those, you will have to find ways. So you can use the different key management systems. Those are offered by cloud service providers, or you can have Vault. And all these sessions can actually authenticate using the Vault itself and not going by giving the secrets every time and passing it. So makes it easier to start from where principle of least privilege can be implemented, and thereafter you move towards the rest of the solutions where you're tying identity with the devices or identity with the data that you are handling, and then coming to a conclusion that what access should be given and what should not be.
So, Abhishek, there's another question for you from Mr. Vishal R. Soni. He asks, what is your perspective on the evolution of IAM and smart card cryptography, especially in the context of post quantum readiness and the growing role of agentic AI in identity lifecycle management, threat detection, and autonomous policy reinforcement?
Oh, that's a long way. Yeah. I going to have a paradigm change in the way it is being looked at. Once the and I mean, I have been to DSCI conferences. I have been to a few more, which are more towards the way government is looking for policies, and I can see that they are very much focused on quantum. Right. So, and this is for Indian policy scene that I'm talking about. Of course, NIST has its own standards and everything, right? So, smart card cryptography, it's one of those FIDO and all where you just put that hardware into the system to authenticate and all these things. They still remain relevant because this is the system which is not part of the overall network. You are just plugging it in, getting authenticated, and pulling it out, and it makes this whole session secure. It will work till the time quantum computing is in place. I think there is a lot that still needs to be done to be able to secure once the quantum computing is in. Agentic AI is going to be a huge challenge, as well as it can actually solve some of our problems as well related to identity lifecycle management. And I think this area is still evolving. We are not very I don't think there are a lot of products that I have seen myself that are doing very well around this. But I'm certain as the need arises, more and more products will pour in. Because when the Gen AI came into picture and people were just putting any prompt into Gen AI, there was nothing in the market that could stop the people for putting whatever information that they are putting into Gen AI for it to get the personal data out of it, or learn on someone else's IP, intellectual property. But now, if you go out, you will see even secure web gateways are actually stopping people from putting all their data in any random GenAI engine. So I think this is still a evolving field, and it will need a lot more evolving before we are able to surely say that we are secure now uh, to an extent.
Thank you
So I
so
hope
much.
Shreya is able to answer. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely, Abhishek. So, David, you have a rather interesting question here. You know, it goes back to the point that Varun made that there will be 2 agents and 3 humans, I mean, approximately in functions, and the number of agents may go on to increase. So, which means that businesses will rely on these agents to make decisions, right? So, as AI systems influence more business decisions, how should enterprises think about accountability and auditability when things go wrong?
So we'll have to address it in around two fronts. One is obviously we'll have to have, and there are companies we are working with and tools that we are deploying that use AI to beat AI. So on one side, we will have to come up with tools and from a enforceability point of view under the gambit of existing laws, that how we use AI to combat AI. That's one part. The other part is, processes and accountability at the enterprise level, just like we have HR policies and all other policy frameworks that we are right now deploying. We will have to have policies around AI with proper human in the loop interfaces to ensure that it is used correctly. Lastly, you and I, we all know that if you see an article, immediately today there are tools available to check whether this is an AI generated article or not. So I think that there will have to be a proper deployment across enterprise to ensure that whenever you're giving basic proposals or presentations, that AI is backed by some kind of a human framework to ensure that we have something that is pertaining to, even if it is with some amount of bias. You can have your bias for the products that you sell, but you cannot go objective to the extent that it comes out of a machine, pure play. uh, till the time things fall in place and mature to another level. So I think it will have to be two-pronged, one at law enforcement side, where we use AI to beat AI, and on the other side, from processes and policies that enterprises will have to work towards.
Thank you so much, David. I think we'll just take one final question, which is for Professor Ajay Singh, which is how do you see India's quantum ecosystem evolving over the next few years? And where can industry collaborate most actively with academia and government?
Thank you for your question. At the We have formed a national quantum mission, and the objective of the quantum national mission is to ensure that we transit safely into the post quantum era, and we exploit these opportunities that are available to the country and become one of the leaders in the global race. Now, it's a challenge because we've started the getting into quantum much later than a China or a US or a European Union. So we have a lot of catching up to do. Second, we have a challenge from big tech. Big tech is all US based. We don't have big tech who is invested in quantum in India. We have only startups. But remarkably, the startups are doing extremely well. They've built good products, and I hope that in future these startups will grow to become bigger companies and provide solutions to Indian customers and even overseas. So that's the second thing that we are addressing. The third is that hubs have been formed by the National Quantum Mission to explore materials and to explore quantum computing itself and the various forms of quantum computing and so on. And these four thematic hubs will have already started delivering. They're doing a lot of research and they will come up with, for example, IIT Madras is seeing how diamonds can be used in quantum computing to make it more precise. So a lot of interesting things are going on. It's all work in progress, a lot of work in progress. Right now, the focus is to ensure that organizations understand the cryptography threat and act on it. And I think a lot of our energy is going in that direction because unless we protect ourselves, F for us. So we can protect ourselves and then exploit the opportunities. When it comes to exploiting opportunities, I see the government playing a very big role in this through public-private partnerships. And this will define how quantum gets adopted in India and how quantum gets widely used in India. But everything eventually will depend on use cases. If there are enough use cases, if there are companies building use cases, and the companies who desire to build use cases, I would encourage them to actually build use cases, because it's not about technology. Technology can be great, it can be very powerful, it can do many things. But if you don't have use cases, where is the adoption going to come from? Yes, people can worry about Q-Day and cryptography, but what about actually exploiting the power of the quantum computer? So there are various dimensions to this, and we are working on various dimensions. And as I said, all sectoral regulators are involved. So every sector is seized of the opportunity. It has to percolate down now to organizational level.
Thank you so much, Professor Ajay Singh. And I must say there are a lot more questions, but this is all the time that we have for today. Thank you so much, our audience, for your active questions. Please feel free to reach out to us over LinkedIn and our experts over LinkedIn, and I'm sure they'll be happy to give you an overview. And thank you so much to all our speakers for sharing such grounded and forward looking perspectives, right? So today's conversation reinforces the fact that 2026 will reward organizations that focus not just on innovation, but also execution security and long term readiness, right? Thank you so much once again to everyone who joined Tech Horizons 2025 with us. And we look forward to continuing this conversation with you. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great one. Cheers. Bye.